All right. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. I'm James Brooks. I'm president of SAR and truly delighted to see such a great turnout for what promises to be a very, very interesting and exciting evening. We are so fortunate to be able to have Davíd Carrasco with us this evening, and I think you will shortly see why. Before I begin, though, I have a question for you all. How many of you are members? Okay. Nice. How many of you received your annual review in today's mail? Not bad. This was a bulk mailing that went out yesterday. It suggests to me that the Postal Service has very little to do anymore, which is a little bit worrisome. But that's great. And how many of you actually had a chance to look at it? Yeah, two. Okay. Well, those of you who are longtime members will know that you'll receive this and you go, "Wow, it's kind of small. What's going on?" This is only the appetizer for what is actually a much bigger and richer version of our annual review, which is now entirely digital, and it's hosted on the SAR website. And it has things like audio files. It has film. It has multiple photography. Real depth. So we'd hope when you get this, all you have to do, every single page has the URL at the bottom, and you can just dive into that site and spend as much time as you'd like. And so we lowered our carbon footprint by about 50%. We lowered our direct costs by about 50%, and we hope that we delivered an additional 50% of content to you. So please enjoy, and we'd love to hear from you when you have spent some time with it. Before I introduce Dr. Carrasco, though, I want to thank our sponsors, Betty and Luke Vortman, Starline Printing, who printed our lecture series program, The Visual and the Virtual, Rendering Humanity Visible. That was my one contribution to the series, was to come up with the title. CT and Susie Herman, longtime supporters of SAR and the lecture series. Bank of America, Thornburg Investment Management, the William H. Donner Foundation, the Lannan Foundation, a new sponsor. We're very grateful for their support. And I especially want to thank Glenn and Shirley Davidson, who will be hosting the dinner for Dr. Carrasco after tonight's lecture. Davíd Carrasco is the Neil Rudenstein Professor of the Study of Latin America with a joint appointment in the Department of Anthropology and the Divinity School at Harvard University. He has a Master of Theology, an MA, and a PhD from the University of Chicago, and among his mentors there at Chicago was Dr. Glenn Davidson. So we're kind of closing a circle here. We're delighted to be able to bring these old colleagues together again. Dr. Carrasco is a Mexican-American historian of religions, and especially to emphasize the plural in that, with a particular interest in the religious dimensions of the human experience, Mesoamerican cities as symbols, immigration, and the Mexican-American borderlands. This has resulted in publications on ritual violence and sacred cities, religion and transculturation, the Great Aztec Temple, and the history of religions in Mesoamerica and other Latino regions. Recent collaborative publications with Mexican archaeologists include Breaking Through Mexico's Past, Digging the Aztecs with Eduardo Matos Moctezuma, and, the subject of tonight's work, Cave, City, and Eagle's Nest, an interpretive journey through the Mapa de Coatinchan, number 2, which was published in 2007 and was the winner of the 2008 PubWest Book Design Award, as well as being featured in the New York Times and the New York Review of Books. His work has included a special emphasis on the religious dimensions of the Latino experience, mestizaje, the myth of Aztlan, about which we will hear tonight, transculturation, and La Virgen de Guadalupe. His most recent publication is a new abridgment of Bernal Diaz del Castillo's memoir of the Conquest, Conquest of Mexico, History of the Conquest of New Spain, which is just out from the University of New Mexico Press. Dr. Carrasco has received recently the Mexican Order of the Aztec Eagle, the highest honor the Mexican government can give to a foreign national. Now, it was in 2008, however, that Davíd Carrasco was at SAR as a participant in one of our advanced seminars on colonial and post-colonial change in Mesoamerica, archaeology as historical anthropology, that John Cantner and I discovered the project about which you will hear tonight, and that was when we began scheming to bring Davíd here. So let's welcome Dr. Carrasco.
Very much, James Brooks. I know that all of us who have had admiration and relationships with the SAR over the years can only be reinvigorated by the kind of expert leadership that he has given to this organization that means so much, not only to the state of New Mexico, but actually to anthropological, literary, and artistic investigations around the United States. So I'm very honored to be here with James Brooks. I also would like to mention my mentor, one of my mentors at the University of Chicago, who was mentioned earlier, Glenn Davidson. I know some of you know Dr. Davidson as I knew him. I can tell you that when I was a student of his, starting out at the University of Chicago, I took courses with him, and to this day, I still have the papers that I wrote for him, in which he wrote in very neat handwriting, detailed and very careful responses and critiques of my work. I've kept them to this day in red ink. I meant to bring it, but I forgot to bring it. But I was looking at it just the other day. It's amazing how right on he was. And it's great to be here with him. It's like Mark Twain said, at the time I thought, this guy's out of his mind. But now I realize, after 15 years, how much he's learned in the process. He was also another person I'd like to mention. That's great to be back here with is Luther Wilson, the former director of the University of New Mexico Press, who had the wisdom and courage to go ahead and publish this book, which has become not only an award winner, but a real symbol of the excellence of the University of New Mexico Press. So I'm grateful to be here with him. I'd also like to do a shout out for a longtime friend of mine, Yolanda Nava, who's here. Yolanda has for many years made important contributions to the cultural identity of Latinos and Latinas, and spent some time here in New Mexico working with the National Hispanic Center. It's wonderful to be with all of you tonight. And I want to thank Santa Fe and also the School of Advanced Research for inviting me to be part of this lecture series, the title of which is The Visual and the Virtual, Rendering Humanity Visible. I've come here tonight to help make a human community in Mexico visible to you by retelling in words and images the story they told themselves. The story they told themselves about their gods, their pilgrimage, and their destiny. It is a great story, an epic story of the Americas that has been rendered into this beautiful book, as I said, that was published here in New Mexico. Together, this great story, which is the stories within stories, and this beautiful book of painted stories, constitutes a significant innovation in scholarship and publishing about Mexico, and especially the religious dimensions of Mexican heritage. I will try and persuade you that this combination of story and book will enrich and renovate the ways the public and scholars alike look at, comprehend, and interpret not only this codex, this visual masterpiece, but all Mesoamerican codices, pre-Hispanic and colonial and other indigenous American life. It can be argued that the reappearance and study of the Cuauhtín can be compared in its significance. Here with the sound. Hold on here, we got to get the sound right. Okay, let me try it again. It can be argued that the reappearance and study of the Mapa de Cuauhtín, and it can be compared in its significance for Mesoamerican peoples, studies and the studies of religions, to the finding and deciphering of a Dead Sea Scroll or a Gnostic Gospel, early biblical text telling of the existence values and beliefs of early Hebrew communities, or in the case of the Gnostics, the teachings of Jesus. You will want to know that of the thousands of pre-Hispanic screenfolds and codices extant at the time of European arrivals in the New World, tragically, only 15 of these pre-Hispanic painted and pictorial manuscripts have survived. Fortunately, indigenous priests, scribes, painters continued, often in secret, producing their sacred histories and calendars. You're going to witness tonight something like an unveiling of the most beautiful and complex surviving indigenous colonial paintings in the Americas. We became involved. It's fascinating in itself. 7 years ago, at Harvard University, every May they have this gathering at the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, where they bring in David Rockefeller and all of his banker friends who make these wonderful contributions to Harvard. During this annual May meeting, the director of the David Rockefeller Center, a historian of Mexican economics, a man named John Coatsworth, came to me during this meeting of this gathering and said in very low tones, by any chance, have you ever heard of this codex called the Mapa de Cuauhtinchan that disappeared in Mexico some years ago? I said, well, yeah, I know something about it, because at that time I had just finished editing the Oxford Encyclopedia of Mesoamerican Cultures, and in the array of documents that we looked at, there was a study in reference to this very important. So then he said, well, listen, a member of our advisory board from a very, very wealthy Mexican family has just come to me and said that she owns this codex. And she would like to know if there's anybody at Harvard that could read it. And I said, well, give me a chance. And so what I did is I flew to Mexico City. I went to the home of Ángeles Espinosa Iglesias, which is like a fortified home there in the area of San Angel. And I went into the home, and there on the walls was a Monet, Manet, the Picassos, and all of this. And she said, well, would you like to see the codex? And I said, I'd love to see the codex. And she went over to this, this pantry where she kept some of her china, and she pulled out this drawer, and there, folded up, was this masterpiece from the 1540s in Mexico. And I began to look at it, and I realized two things immediately. That up in the upper left-hand corner of this codex, what we had was the very best image ever painted of the place called Aztlán. Now, those of you who have lived in New Mexico for a while or in touch with the cultural history, you know that this place called Aztlán is very important to Latinos, Hispanics, Mexican Americans, because it is believed to be the original homeland of the indigenous people who migrated from the north into the center of Mexico and founded Mexico City. And people have all kinds of controversies of where is Aztlán. Some people say, well, Aztlán is in Nayarit. Other people say it's in Arizona. Some people say it's in New Mexico. Recently someone said, they found it in Salt Lake City. But I said, no, it's right here on the map. It's right up here, and I'm going to show you about this. So I knew right away that this was significant for me as a Mexican American and for the studies. The second thing I noticed about the Mapa when I looked at it was right in the middle of the Mapa was a city, the great city of Cholula. It's the largest. The buildings are here in the middle of this document. And Cholula was the pilgrimage capital of the Aztec period of history. It was the place to which all the peoples in Mesoamerica went to make pilgrimages and often to try to make peace, although there was often warfare there. So I knew right away that this document had two of these very important places on it. I then set about, after talking with Ángeles Espinosa Iglesias, to organize a 5-year study, bringing together 15 scholars from anthropology, religion, art history, ethnobotany, iconography, and a whole series of disciplines, a method I'd learned at the University of Chicago. The best way really develop new knowledge is to bring people from different disciplines together to look at the multiple dimensions. So we organized this. And some of the things that we found in the early part of our study about the Mapa de Cuauhtinchan, that means the map of the place of the eagle's nest. Cuauhtinchan means the place of the eagle's nest. One of the first things that we learned about this is that this was, through our analysis, painted around 1542 by native Tlaquilos or scribes. It was used in the community for ritual and narrative purposes. And it first comes into outsider public knowledge in 1735, when an Italian nobleman named Lorenzo Boturini, having traveled through Spain, where he was acquainted with a woman who was known as the Countess of Santibáñez, a lineal descendant of Moctezuma, a noble descendant of the Aztec king Moctezuma II, gave Boturini a stipend to come to Mexico in order to search for surviving indigenous documents that they could then use in the hopes of trying to make a case to Rome for the apparitions of the Virgins of Guadalupe. They were hoping to find in these colonial indigenous documents evidence that the Virgin of Guadalupe had appeared where she had supposedly appeared. And so Boturini, with cash in hand, comes over to Mexico, and he begins to travel around the country, and he discovers that in the town of Cuauhtinchan, there are this magnificent map, and he goes there, and he tries to purchase it. But the elders in the community say, well, no way, we're not going to let you have this thing that is so important to us. He's frustrated by it, and he writes down in his diary, which we have, that he'd gone there, he'd seen this marvelous thing, they wouldn't let him have it, and he went on. We never hear again about this document until 1892. What happens is in 1891, an academic journal comes out in Spain saying that in the town of Cuauhtinchan, near Puebla, how many of you have been to Puebla, Mexico? A number of you know where Puebla is. So near Puebla, it comes out in 1891 that the indigenous scribes there are still guarding a trove of pictorial manuscripts. In that year, 1892, Spain is about to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus's landfall with a huge exhibition in Madrid. They want to have this mapa, this document sent to Madrid for the exhibition. They send people to Cuauhtinchan. They ask them if they can borrow it. Of course, the indigenous elders say no way, but they allow them. The indigenous elders allow an Italian to make a copy of the Mapa de Cuauhtinchan. These are images of the copy. This goes to Madrid. It becomes a sensation, and people in Europe are somewhat aware of what is really waiting for some future person to come and get it in Mexico. This document stays in the community. It stays in the community until 1933, used in ritual and storytelling purposes. By then, the community is weaker, and the document goes into a museum in Puebla. It stays in the museum in Puebla. Now, in the 1960s in Mexico, the Mexican anthropologists and archaeologists are really getting themselves organized, and they have a very powerful organization called the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia. And this organization decides to make sure that all of these indigenous national treasures are registered by the government. People know where they are and so forth and so on. They go to the museum, they see what it is, and this becomes registered as a national treasure. So we know that in 1964 that it had come to the attention. Mysteriously, in 1977, it disappeared from the museum. Somehow it went into private hands, into the hands of bankers and other people who kept this document, brought it out at parties and showed it. There were some minor studies of it, some very bad photographs of it. But people really don't know what's happened to it until that day at Harvard, when John Coatsworth came and whispered in my ear, have you ever heard of the Mapa de Cuauhtinchan? As you will now see, this document was painted when Mesoamerican indigenous people, around 1542, 20 years after Cortez and his Spanish army come, were living under the constant threat of displacement, disappearance, and amnesia. It reveals their community-based efforts to paint and tell their fading mythology, their sacred history, to leave a record of the botanical practices which are spread throughout this document. Their marriage rituals, ritual sacrifices, and sacred pilgrimages. They were doing this for future generations. As I take you into the details of our scholarly project and then the grand tour of this codex, where I'm going to also raise some questions for you that our study could not settle, allow me to frame its significance and our retelling of its ancient story with this short poem by the Mexican Nobel laureate Octavio Paz, a poem entitled January 1st. Tomorrow we shall have to think up signs, sketch a landscape, and fabricate a plan on the double page of day and paper. Tomorrow we shall have to invent once more the reality of this world. And now we turn to the indigenous artists working on the double page of dark days and paper. Artists who use their skill and beautiful paints to fabricate, in the best sense of the word fabricate, the reality of their world. So I want to make sure that for those of you who don't have a background in this, that I'm as clear as I can be. So I'd like everybody to be brought into this story. The first thing I want to do is to tell you about the scholarly project, try to involve you in some way in the scholarly project, where I organized these 15 scholars from different disciplines to look at this map from the different perspectives that they would bring to a study of an indigenous document. And so we had 2 academic meetings. And in the first academic meeting that we had, I instructed everybody, come to the first meeting, having looked at this document, but don't tell me what you think the document is about. The first thing we want to do in the first day is we want to talk about the direction we come from to look at this document. We want to put on the table what our biases and our questions are from the point of view of archaeoastronomy, because there's a lot of astronomy in this. From the point of view of botany. What does the botany ask? I don't want him to tell me what he thinks yet, or what she thinks. Tell me what you ask. So we laid out our questions as we began to look at this document. And we also went to Cuautinchan today. For those of you who know Mexico, here you see Mexico City. Here are the, I can't quite see from here, but here are the volcanoes. And Cuautinchan is over here just south of Cholula and Puebla. You can see it here on the map. And this is what the local landscape looks like today outside of the town of Cuautinchan. Now, one of the questions that always comes up, what about the native people today? They were very interested in this project. We talked to them. And during the Q&A, perhaps I can tell you more about that part of what we learned. We had 2 meetings. The first was in Cuautinchan, in Puebla itself, where we visited one of the earliest churches the Spaniards built in Mexico. And they built it right on top of this indigenous community, as is the pattern. And here you can see San Juan Bautista Convent. We also took graduate students with us out to the field, and here we are looking at the Mapa itself and locating places on the landscape. And actually this tree, this thick vegetation behind us, this is actually the main pyramid. The pyramid is underneath. It goes way up here like this, and we're at the base of the pyramid that you'll see and we then we had another meeting a year later at Harvard University, where now we could, in a sense, people unload your interpretations. Now bring your interpretations, but bring them so that we learn from each other here. It's not just stand up, give your talk, sit down, and leave, as you see in many of these conferences. It's more the SAR model, where people talk, raise questions, and share, so that we learn things that are new. One of the things that we learned was, as I said before, only 15 of the pre-Columbian documents survived. Here's one of them. This is the Codex Fejevery-Mayer. I want you to look at the images and some of the symbolism here, how it's depicted. It's actually a map of the cosmos. The cosmos has 5 parts. Here's the eastern quadrant of the world. Here's the northern quadrant of the world. Here is the western quadrant of the world, and so forth. And here in the middle is a warrior who's sacrificed himself. He's bleeding, and his blood is going into the four quarters of the universe to energize it. And if you flew over the Great Pyramid of Teotihuacan today and looked down, this is what it would look like. This would be the part and the four sides of the pyramid. So in a sense, this cosmic image was in the back of our mind as we looked to what it all became in the colonial period. Another example of the pre-Columbian, one of the other of the 15 that has survived, comes from the Codex Borgia. It's called the Codex Borgia because it's in Rome. It's part of the Borgia collection in the Vatican Library. And the surviving 15 documents, the majority are spread over Europe. There's a few in Mexico. So it's very important that we take care of this one that is in Mexico. These are the kinds of things we had to look at in our scholarly analysis. We also took the document that you're going to be looking at in a minute, and we compared it with other colonial manuscripts, because the iconography, the story I'm going to tell you, was also told in some other stories, rather like the Gospels, where you have 4 versions of the life of Jesus. Well, there's also 4 versions of the 5 versions of this particular community story. So we had a chance to look at these other documents, and we had specialists come in who could compare what we were seeing in the Mapa de Cuauhtinchan with the other materials. We were very fortunate, and this is relevant to the kind of lecture series that's here on the virtual. We had a team in Mexico led by a restorer named Marina Straulino, and they did a fabulous analysis, a microscopic analysis of the codex itself. And here you can see the codex. These black parts are the things that have been lost, the tears over the years, where it was folded and unfolded. And what we discovered was that this big piece of paper, which is about 3.5 feet high and about 6.5 feet long, it actually consists of many other pieces of paper. Each of these is a different piece of paper that they wetted, and then they pounded it together into one big piece of paper on which they could then paint their story. We had this kind of microscopic analysis of the Mapa de Cuauhtinchan. Here's what we were faced before the conservation. What you're looking at here is something that's so important even among the Pueblo peoples here, fire ceremonies. This is a fire ceremony that is taking place inside of a ritual building. And there's all kinds of symbolism I don't have time to go into. This is what we had before the restoration, and this is what we were able to see after the digital restoration of this document. And so it was really so spectacular to be able to look more clearly at things that had been lost but could be recovered through this new type of scientific material. So here's another example, where here is the image of Aztlan, which I'm going to show you in some detail. This is the place of 7 caves, out of which the ancestors come. And here you see it under a series of other types of photographs, intensified, infrared, and ultraviolet. And we began to see that not only was there information there that had been lost, but they actually had covered up earlier versions of the story. And we could see underneath other images that in the final retelling they decided not to include in their narrative history. We began to see, for instance, here's a scene where you have a huge eagle that actually has a man inside. Here's the face of a man inside the eagle. And he's surrounded by these 4 warriors who have their arrows pointed at him along the road. See the little footprints here? Here they're going on their journey. They're going up here and so forth, and they stop, and they're hunting this eagle man. Well, down here, what the infrared showed us was that there is a scene. Here's a scene above where 2 men are holding a ritual staff, and that scene has been taken out. It's been whited out by the indigenous painters themselves, and we saw this all the way along in our scholarly project. We also found that there were only three European words on the entire document. This is important for us, and I think very important for the SAR work. Other documents that were painted by indigenous people at the same time often included Spanish, and they also included images of Europeans. When these people told this story, they decided it was going to be an indigenous story. There's not a single Spaniard on this story, even though the Spaniards had been there for 20 years. There's one building, there's one Spanish building, which I'll show you. And they decided, unlike some of their neighbors who were telling their stories and including European script, they decided they were not going to tell their story that way. Later, we figure out, people came and added 3 words. These are words of places, which signal to us that this document was used in a land dispute in the Spanish courts after the conquest. We also see that boundary lines were added. These were clearly added during the Spanish colonial period to mark off boundaries which we know now were part of this land dispute. Here is one of the great scenes before conservation, and here is what we were able to see at the end of this conservation. And what you have here are two figures who may represent one single figure with really cool names. Here is Featherlip. Here he is. He's got a feather coming out of his lip. He's got a Quetzal feather. This is Quetzal. And here's Serpent Foot. And you can see the serpent down here, kind of almost like a cartoon, but the serpent has that little split tongue there. And they have arrived, as you'll see, from the city. These are city folks. They dress like city folks. They're stylish people. See, they got their hair made up differently than the Chichimecas and so forth. These people are wearing rabbit skins. These guys have been to tailors and are coming to show off at the place of 7 caves. Here is the full post-conservation digital reconstruction, where we're able to find all kinds of material that we hope will be available for the next generation of scholars who are going to come along and do far beyond what we've been able to see. So now let me take you on the tour and try to involve you in 2 problems that we had that we could not solve. And I'd be interested in the Q&A and what you see. I particularly, I teach at Harvard University, and I want you to know, and I think Glenn Davidson will be pleased at this, I also teach in the Harvard Extension School. I love teaching in the Harvard Extension School. I like the undergraduates too, you understand. But the Harvard Extension School has adults. And the adults come and they got all this life experience. So if we're talking about the history of religions or anthropology or life or death or burials or symbolism, it becomes much richer because they've been through all that. My wonderful undergraduates, they're just writing down stuff and, so forth. But the people in the Harvard Extension School, we have the best conversation. So I want to set up a conversation here with you and to take you on this tour and show you a couple of problems we've had which we couldn't solve. Now, when you look at this map, you can go blind when looking at the map. There's 700 images on this map. So Professor Carrasco, give us some orientation. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, just show you the 3 central images that'll help you organize your visual looking at this. The first one is, of course, the place of Aztlán, the place of origin, which you see up here is 7 caves. This is where the story begins, where these ancestors have come out of this 7 caves, and they've gone on this journey. And here's the road, this winding serpent-like road, where you can get all kind of lost. It goes and it splits here. They have a big argument I'll tell you about. One group goes this way, another group goes this way. But they eventually arrive at the second big image, and that's the city of great transformation. They arrive here at the city. I'll take you there. And then, and this is part of the problem that we've had, and I'd like to know what you think, they go on a huge journey, but now the pathway is completely different. It's not this serpentine, winding road. It's a great circumambulation of a huge territory of Mexico. It goes from central Mexico. These people walked all the way to Oaxaca. They walk back up to Veracruz. They come back over to Cholula and then arrive at their town. This is the third big image, the third orienting image, the cave, the city, and then where they settle themselves. Here, it's only about 20 miles from Cholula, but they don't just walk over there. They go on this huge circumambulation. It's kind of like your life and my life, right? It takes a long way to get to home, and so forth. So now these are the 3 images that I first want you to notice as a way of trying to get you involved in the interpretation of this. Here's the first one. This is the place of 7 caves. It's a beautiful image of Aztlán or Chico Mostoc. Sometimes in the documents it says our ancestors came from Aztlán, which means the place of whiteness or the place of cranes. Sometimes it says they came from Chikomostok, the place of 7 caves. Here you see the 7 caves. I'm going to show you some more close-ups of this, in which each cave has an ancestor, and they're flying out at the beginning. They're flying out of this place. They're bringing, in a sense, the ancestors into the world. Here is a close-up of the city. Now we're in the middle of the map. I'm going to take you to places in between, and you can see it's unlike any other part of the map. First of all, it's an urban place. Look at the buildings. These buildings are grid-like, with columns, monumental structures. And in the middle of the ceremonial center are these 2 huge chichimecas, these 2 ancestors who are doing a sacrifice, which I'll show you about in a minute. Here's the turquoise house. Here's the turquoise house here. And actually, if you look close, you can actually see people's faces inside of these houses. And so this is the central part of the map. And then finally, this is what their new homeland looks like. After they take that big journey, they come to Kwautin Chan. And here you see they left caves and they come back to caves. There's a huge cave here in which there is an eagle and a jaguar having some kind of argument. It looks like they're fussing about something here. And this is the hillsides above the town. And here you can see they've started to build their town here. But when they arrive, they start in the cave, they go to the city, now they arrive at their settlement. 300 years later, they do a new fire ceremony here too. They did a fire ceremony when they left. They do a fire ceremony now when they arrive. So we're now back at the map. There's the 3 big spaces. Let me give you a little history of it. The story actually begins here at the city, where in the 13th century, around 1260, the people in this city are having a real conflict with some of their neighbors who want to take over the city. The people in the city know, the Toltecs in the city, they know about these tough guys over here in Aztlan. And they send these 2 priests, and here you can see the footprints, Featherlip and Serpentfoot. They go on this journey, and they come, and they ask the Chichimecas to come out and come help them defend the city. Then there's this crazy journey going back and forth. They arrive at the city, and they defend the city successfully, and it's because of the defense of that city, with the help of warriors from Aztlan, that the people from Aztlan are then given a license to go and find their own community. In the text it says, in another text associated with this, it says to go find their divine lands. And they go then on this tremendous journey, and they're starting here about 1260, and this ends in 1540. So you've got a 300-year period. Not only got this huge space of Mexico, you have now a 300-year period in which narrations are taking place. Here's the first big question for you. When you look at this map, the left side is so different from the right side. And those of us interested in narrations and epics and poetry, why would these people narrate the history, the sacred history of their community, in which almost right down the middle, it's all like this on the left side? You can see how windy this is. It's like, are they gone? Are they lost? Where are they going? And so forth. They arrive at the city. And then you look at the right side, and it's just the opposite. Here's the road, which there's all kinds of narrations. There's all these open spaces. In fact, in their actual geography, these aren't open spaces. There's all kind of towns here and things and so forth. But they have decided to narrate their space, the second part of their story, in a completely different spatial manner than they do in the first place. We had arguments about this and debates and so forth, and I think we just need people with more experience about life to solve this problem. So here you see the whole thing, the left side of the map, the right side of the map. And I'm going to take you on a quick tour that lead up to our discussion. The second big issue that we had was how much of this document was an insider document. How much of it really was for people in the 1540s to know their own stories, to pass it on to children, to make sure rituals are being kept, to know the sacred places. And how much of this map was painted and used so that they could defend themselves in a Spanish court. And there's all kinds of arguments about this, that it really is strictly, largely an indigenous document for indigenous eyes. And others have said, no, this really was constructed to defend the community and the tradition in Spanish courts. What you have to know and what you must know if you live in Santa Fe is that early on in the colonial period, the Spaniards came and set up these legal systems and these courts. And one of the things that was very interesting in the colonial record about indigenous folks is they very quickly picked up on these Spanish courts. And they became very effective at going to the Spanish courts. And they would often take their documents because they realized that these Españoles, they were really, they were obsessed with documents. So if you showed up with a document, that was like showing up with a piece of the Bible. Well, you got your Bible? Well, look what we got. And they very quickly learned this. And so this argument is still not settled. So here's the tour. Now, what's interesting about this first image of Aztlán, that I think is going to be very interesting for you, is that it's a woman who's leading them. Now, in the 1960s, when the Chicano movement began, and Aztlán was always talked about, they never mentioned that there were women in Aztlán. It was always these bad dudes who were in Aztlán, who led us out of Aztlán. And here you have an image of the ancestors being led of Aztlán by a very powerful-looking woman. She's larger. She's the one who's dressed most elaborately. She's carrying the sun on her back. And she's also got in her hand a trophy of a leg of one of the Aztec gods. That's how tough she is. Here she is. Her name is Itzpapalotl. That means obsidian butterfly. So all of a sudden we have this document showing up that's changing a lot of the gender prejudices that people have had about the origin stories of the Aztecs. Here she is. Now, she's really super tough because she already has 4 arrows sticking in her from this battle that she's had. You can see her here, her clothes, she's got this shield, but here she's carrying the leg of one of the Aztec gods. And you know it's an Aztec god because you see this sandal here? Whenever you see that kind of sandal, those are jade sandals. Those are only worn by Aztec gods. I really like this, and I can't help this because when we were doing this study, we had at that time a certain president at Harvard who came out and talked about women as not being very effective with math and science and so forth. And finally, I was going to send him this as a Christmas card and say, look, this is what happens when you talk about women this way. That today, he moved on to other things, but I hear recently he's coming back, so I still have a chance to show him this. This is what happens. Immediately when they leave, they've come out. They have this new fire ceremony. I don't want to dwell on that because I want to take you on the road. So here they are on the road. They've come out at the invitation of the city people to come and say, help us defend our city. And here they go. Little footprints, cute little footprints. I don't know how they painted this, if they had a little thing and went, toot, 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 left, right, because there's no error. There's no 2 left feet in the Mapa itself. And here they're hunting, on this particular date, they're hunting eagles. So there's this great hunt that's taking place. Then right after that, you see what looks like the first time that they're eating agricultural products of corn. He doesn't look like he likes it very much, but we know from other documents that the eating of corn, you know this in New Mexico, the eating of corn, that's a big deal in indigenous communities. And it's a very big deal the first time a child eats corn. Because actually the first time a child eats corn in the Aztec world, that child is moving from childhood into another stage of life. And that child is taking into his body things that come out of the earth which are heavy and also begin that child on the pathway to death. Because once you begin to ingest things from the earth, you will return to the earth. So this corn stuff, this is, it's really big. And here you see that sometimes it says that you can't, once you eat corn, then you can learn the lingua franca of the Aztec world, which was Nahuatl. So they go a little bit further. Here's the scene that I showed you. What's really interesting when you look up close to this is look at this face over here. Here's a nose and a mouth, and he's saying something. These are speech glyphs. Some sort of speech glyph here. We don't know what this is, but you can imagine the kind of storytelling that was produced and supported by this kind of map. That's why I compare it to the Iliad and the Odyssey. If you were to take elders who know the story tradition of this, and you were to have them tell you these stories, and you were to lay out those stories of every one of these scenes, it'd be longer than the Iliad or the Odyssey. I guarantee you. I know some of these stories, and those of you who've heard native elders tell stories, they like to tell long stories. They're into long stories. Well, you can tell the kind of long stories that would have come out of this. Soon after that, we see the first human sacrifice. And it's the sacrifice of a female, not the female who led them out of Cuauhtinchan. Here you see her. She has a sign of conquest. Whenever you see an arrow in this part of the skull, that means there's been a conquest. And we know a town has been conquered because this particular temple means which is burning, means that there's been a conquest here. She's been sacrificed, and her heart is being offered to the sun, Tonatiuh, to nourish the sun. And so we see this type of ritual violence going along. But the most powerful sequence to me on the left side of the map is what I call crossing cosmic barriers, where you see them coming along and there's a tornado that lifts up these individuals and strips them of their clothes, turns them upside down, takes everything away from them. Then there's this fabulous image of two individuals falling into a crack in the earth. I have to tell you that when we first saw this, we had all kinds of debates about whether they're falling into the earth or whether they're going into a world behind the map. You know, what did this really mean? And we've never been able to solve that. Then there's a flood. And here you see someone being swept away, another one of these storms. And then this royal sacrifice of another woman takes place here. I'm going to show you close-ups as we move through this part of the map. Here you see that this tornado, which is beautifully painted. And on the map, this is only about this large, so you can imagine the kind of painterly expertise. Here's the wind god who's causing this. You have a question, sir?
Does Mexico have tornadoes?
Oh, yes, they do. Of all kinds, social and natural tornadoes, yeah. And here you see this close-up of this. Now, is this two individuals or one individual? One individual coming out, one individual coming back. Some of you may think of the Popol Vuh and the story of the hero twins who go into the underworld. It's an incredible kind of image that has puzzled us all along. Here you see the flood, where he's being swept away, and then the sacrifice. Now, I won't dwell on this, but I'll show you that when they're having this sacrifice, they're marking it with a very important date. This is a crucial date in the Aztec calendar associated with renewal. And here you see the woman being captured, and she's being captured by her hair. Just to give you some anthropology, in Aztec anthropology, there are three souls. One is in the fontanelle, one is in the heart, and one is in the liver. And in all of these documents, whenever there's a conquest or a capture, they always capture them here in the fontanelle area, which means you're grabbing the animistic essence of that person. That's what's taking place here. And then here she is, totally dominated by both the Toltec, the city guy, and the people out of Aztlan, and her heart is also being offered. So you have human sacrifice. Now, if this was an outsider document, would the indigenous people have included this to show to the Spaniards? Maybe yes, maybe no. I want to hear from you. But the women themselves were not the only ones sacrificed. As you'll see in this image, they got their own. Had their own way of expressing violence. Now, in the original document, you have two women carrying something toward this corral along the road. Closer examination shows that they're carrying heads of men, and they're carrying them to a corral where there's a whole bunch of heads of animals. And so these women, they're also participating in this type of ritual violence. Here is the road, and over here you have something that's very important, I think, to Native Americans all over the Americas, a sacred bundle. Here's a sacred bundle where the ancestors' bones and other sacred objects are wrapped up. They're worshiping as they go along. This is a beautiful scene where, again, we see our figure. Here is feather lip, and here's serpent foot, showing up again at a kind of a negotiation at the river, where they're talking. Seem to be some important negotiating taking place. They've laid down their staffs to cross this river as they go along. And one of the things that was so fabulous in the study is that the botany and the botanical practices are so detailed throughout this. This just shows you 5 different types of corn at different stages of gestation, located inside of a mountain, different colors and different types of corn at different stages of growing, and so forth. And the 2 ethnobotanists who wrote a fabulous essay that's in the book, Roberto Bay and Edelmira Linares, they went to markets today in Mexico where they work, and they found evidence of the continuity between this representation of corn and the way corn is used today. One of my favorite scenes, I call it Red Hot Words. They're having an argument. He's looking at him and saying, "Hey, get lost," and he's got something else to say. And they split. One group goes here, one group goes here. Sacred bundle. And right away, some people are punished. They're being punished. They're being stuck with knives in a yucca forest. There's a forest of yucca plants. Here you see the yucca. There's all this kind of drama that's taking place. And you see these sacred bundles showing up all over the map. One of the articles in the book by Guillaume Olivier traces the 14 bundles, sacred bundles, that are here. Here you see at Tlaloc. Here's the underworld. This is the entrance to the underworld. Here's the bundles in different ritual locations. Here he's carrying one on his back. Here's one in a ritual location. Here's one in a mountain in another ritual. What's the meaning of these? This is very interesting because in the colonial history of Mexico, this is the first image ever of a cultivated cotton field. This is a cotton field that's been cultivated. And here you see not only the negotiation, but here's one of the great Aztec goddesses. This is Xochiquetzal. She is, here is the Quetzal on her back. She is flower Quetzal. She is both plant and bird. And she is also the goddess of weaving. She's the goddess of weaving. She weaves things together. They pass by the Popocatépetl, Iztaccíhuatl. I'm sure how many of you have seen these volcanoes in Mexico? There they are. There's the Popo. He's smoking then. He's smoking away. And so they arrive at the city. So now they've arrived at the city. There is no image of warfare except one on this. So they've come there to defend the city against the city's enemies. They're successful. The only symbol of warfare is right here. It's an escudo. It's a shield. And on the shield is a bumblebee. And that's one of the images of warfare. We know from a sister document that a war did take place, that they were successful, that apparently it was a very brutal war. And now they're doing a ritual, and they're sacrificing, but they're not sacrificing humans, because this city had a reputation for sacrificing animals, sacrificing insects. Here you see a close-up. There is the serpent. There is the grasshopper. Here is a moth. And here is an eagle. This is the sacrifice that's taking place. And here you see the body of the moth. The moth that's been, or the butterfly that has been sacrificed here. We can talk about the meaning of this. This is that location today. This is the Great Pyramid of Cholula. I'm sure some of you have been there. Here you see the great ceremonial center, the ruins of it down here. And here, of course, is the Christian church on top, the Catholic church on top. This is a shrine dedicated to Our Lady of the Remedies, Nuestra Señora de los Remedios. And today, throughout the year, you will see people coming here on pilgrimages. In matter of fact, when I was studying with Glenn Davidson, I was down in Mexico, and I was there one day. I went to see it. I went to see it, and I trudged up there. I was kind of pooped out. I was sitting there, kind of thinking about it. I was sitting right outside. I heard these firecrackers going off in the distance. They kept getting closer, Fire, and all of a sudden, I heard this band. There were trumpets and tubas and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, into the ceremonial area right up there, stumbled about 15 of these people. They were largely men in their 50s and 60s. They had these kind of old beat-up shoes. And behind them came some young people carrying on their backs the Virgin from their own community, which had been a 4 days walk. These people had walked for 4 days. They'd come up to the top. They trudged in there, and they then took their Virgin in to meet the Virgin that was inside of that church. Just before they went in, they looked over at me because we talked, and they said, "Hey, man, buddy, come on with us." I said, "No, man, that's okay. You guys go ahead." But we then began to talk. And this is a sacred magnet. And it was a magnet in the time of the map. It's a magnet today. So, left side of the map. We started here. Here's the cosmic barriers. Here's the split in the road. Right up here. Here itself is the city. What do you make of the fact that the right side of the map is so different in its spatial organization, in its events. This side of the map represents the settlement. Here they are settling themselves, and during their settlement, during the 200-year period, well, we see other pathways. We see other types of footprints, and I'll show you where they go. But here's this road that goes all the way to Oaxaca, all the way to Veracruz, and back to Puebla so that they can finally find their home. Just a quick series of images, and then I'm running out of time. I want to make sure we have discussion. So here they are. They're on their way to found their community, and they hunt deer. And here they are capturing a deer at this location, and here they are splitting the deer. They're killing the deer and splitting it up. So they're recording here this type of hunting and ritual dismemberment. Then they come, here are the footprints, and they come to this community, and this is Eagle Mountain on the date 2 knife. Here's a calendar that's in it. And this community has been captured big time because they got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 arrows in the temple, and that means that there's a conquest along the road of this community. One of my most favorite images, here they come along, and they come to this place with these 2 ears. This is Rumor Town. The name of this place refers to a belief in these communities that these mice with their big ears, they live in the wall and they're always listening, and they're the ones that spread rumors. So be careful what you say. This is Chisme Town right here. This is Chisme Town. This is Tlaloc. And here you see them weaving, images of their weaving, and a drum. So here you see all of this information that's overwhelming to us. And then a figure that shows up in the children's book that has grown out of this, a woman made of stone. There's a man made of stone, and there's a woman made of stone. She's been turned into stone along the way, and we see several images of this. I wanted to just sort of start to weave you now into the final part of the talk, which is the way in which our scholarship tried to link then to now. So here you see an image in the Mapa where a child is being forced to eat chili peppers. And I drove up yesterday from Albuquerque, man. I passed this truck, and it was full of these ristras. And they were so red, and there were so many of them. It was so sweet, and it hurt to go by, but look at him. Here he is. Now, there's actually other documents tell us that children in the Aztec world, when they were disobedient, they were sometimes forced to eat chiles. Or they were put over chiles that were burned in the smoke, and they put them in there. So you don't listen to your mother, this is what happens to you. Not a bad idea. You should think about it here in New Mexico. But here you see the images. This painting would have been like this, and here is what the chili pan actually looks like. So you can see that these artists are being very careful about their representation. Coming closer to the end here, they're not only walking on the earth, they're also going into not only the underworld, but they're going into other regions. And this image shows it. Because here you see footprints. See the footprints here? These footprints are following 2 other footprints. This is the footprints of a deer across a snow field that has 4 little hillocks on each side. You see that rings the snow field. And in the middle you have a twisted 2 trees that are intertwined, and you have 2 snakes that are intertwined. In Aztec mythology, this always signifies that you're in Tamoanchan, which is paradise, that you're in the world of the afterlife. And this seems to be some reference to them where the hunter does catch the deer that he's following and also meets this woman who's in a cave and has some sort of important communication. So this it signaled us to the other. Then it's really toward the end here. There is a marriage ceremony. And in the marriage ceremony, 2 women from the town of Cuautinchan, that is the place they finally arrived at, have come down, and I'll show you their footprints in a minute. They've come down all the way from the city, all the way to Oaxaca. So they've had to walk about 150 miles. And here they are marrying 2 local characters at a place called Serpent Mountain, you see, at which there's also a sacrifice of animals. You can see here the sacrifice of these animals. Here's the priest with his musical instrument. This is actually a trumpet. And here they're carrying out this particular wedding ceremony and a sacrifice. And then, almost the last slide, here is the one place where the Spaniards show up. So here they are in 1540s, they're painting their own story, and they slip the Spaniards in. Here's a Spanish church, the outline of a church. There's actually two of these in the document. What's really remarkable about this church is that this is the atrio, the area outside. Here's the entrance to the church. Here's the tower. Is that it's right next to an indigenous temple. And you all know that when the Spaniards came, one of the first things they did was destroy these temples and use these temple stones to build their own churches. If I take you to Mexico City, I can show you where the National Cathedral is built out of the stones from the great Aztec temple. That's here. But when they paint it, they keep their temple in play, as well as the Catholic temple. And I think this is saying something very important about their identity, that dual identity that we talk about today, being mestizo, mestizaje, Hispanic. Well, here it is. This kind of combination is right there. So here's where the wedding ceremony takes place. So here's the wedding ceremony down here. Here's the footprints of the women who've come down for the wedding ceremony, and then they head back up there. Here's the church. Here's the church. So the church is actually outside of the area of the city itself. And what we did finally is the book.